Welcome into episode 246 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Hope everybody had a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. It's been a little bit of turkey in the stomach for the Bruins the last couple of games. Not their greatest hockey of the season. There was a good win against the Panthers in there. Lots to talk about, including some roster transactions, mainly Mason Lohrei going back down to Providence, which was a debated topic prior to. But before we get to our opening shifts, Bridget, how was your weekend? I know you were busy calling games, and Scott, you were down in NYC. So talk to the people. How are you guys doing on this beautiful Monday?
I am tired. I had 7 broadcasts in 8 days. Actually, my voice is kind of sounding like it's going a little bit now, but I did 4 broadcasts this weekend. I talked for 8 hours a day, Friday and Saturday. It was too much. And now I'm prepping for next week's UMass Lowell UConn men's game, and then I have the UConn's women's game too. Doing 4 jobs in hockey season may be too much. I don't know if you guys you guys agree.
I don't have to do 4 jobs, so I don't know. Sounds crazy, but Bridget does a great job on college games, though, in addition to her podcast duties and everything else with the EI. So, I know we touch on it plenty, but yeah, Bridget does a ton during hockey season.
You're gonna tune in on Friday, right?
Well, yeah, there's also BU Merrimack Friday night, right?
Bridget's on Nesson on Friday. You gotta tune in.
I'll be going back and forth, or maybe I'll have one on the laptop.
Here's one for you, Scott. I have Yale BU at the end of December. You better tune in.
I definitely will. Yeah, New York City was great. Saw too much losing hockey, to be honest. Not only the Bruins losing Friday and Saturday, but BU lost to Cornell in red hot hockey, which was a game they were dominating for a while, and then I don't know, they only could score 1 goal and seemed to get frustrated and let Cornell come storming back. So yeah, that was a tough loss for BU, but they're still doing just fine in all the rankings.
Welcome to the college hockey podcast, guys.
Right.
the college skate pod.
Yeah, so but other than that, I had a great time in New York, and then sat in all the Thanksgiving traffic coming back on Sunday, which I knew was going to happen, but it still doesn't really prepare you for just how awful that drive can be when it's the end of a holiday weekend. Glad to be back, though, because a couple of us were traveling. That's why, we're doing this podcast a little later than I think we had initially anticipated, but that's all right. We're still going to get it out, and we'll have another one, Wednesday morning reacting to, Monday's game in Columbus, as well as some bigger picture topics.
All right. And yeah, there's definitely a lot to break down, and Bruins fans have been very, very lucky the last couple of regular seasons. There has been more or less nothing but winning. How have the playoffs gone? Not so great. But in the regular season, it's been smooth sailing for Boston, and to the point where everybody was, or a lot of people were just kind of like, no matter how many games the Bruins won, because of their collapse in the postseason last year, it's simply show us in spring, show us in the playoffs. Nothing matters until the playoffs, which we've talked about here is not true, but that's a lot of the narrative. But then, choo-choo, here comes the losing train, and now everybody's, the sky is falling, and this team sucks, and they're not cup contenders anymore. So which is it, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. But I do think that it opens up the possibility for us to discuss where this team does need improvements, whether they're winning the last couple of games or losing. So let's start with our opening shifts. And Bridget, let's go ladies first and start with you.
All right. Well, it's funny because I have the positive one. So I was going to talk about some of the bright spots in, otherwise kind of a chaotic weekend of matinee games that, were not necessarily the Bruins' best starts. I know matinee games are different and pose their own issues, especially back-to-back ones. That was weird for me. But anyway, some of the bright spots in the two losses this weekend, and especially in the second game in New York, was the Charlie Coyle line. When the Friday game, they were not with James Van Riemsdyk. He was taking kind of like a maintenance day, just a little bit of a rest day for him. But then when he came back and it was Patrick Kane, Van Riemsdyk again, it looked great. We are going to talk about some of the defensive breakdowns, but that Coyle line was a force. Frederick had a really nice setup on one of two Coyle goals. He's had 4 goals in the last 4 games, scored 2 on Saturday. And Van Riemsdyk, when he's in, he's just like, he's kind of a quiet player where you don't notice him until all of a sudden the puck is like right in the crease, and then he's just knocking people out of the way and getting shots, like, because he's kind of just a waiting, like, that opportunity, but he does such a good job with it. And I just think that line has been a bright spot even in the losses.
Yeah, I will gladly take the negative with my opening shift, and that is that Saturday was by far the Bruins' worst defensive game of the season, and not at all how you want to bounce back after giving up 5 goals on Friday to then give up a season-high 7 on Saturday. Friday, I think a lot of their issues were penalty related. Bruins took too many penalties. Their penalty kill had some breakdowns we don't usually see, with Detroit scoring 2 power play goals within like 12 seconds of a power play starting. Red Wings had another goal that came right after a power play. But Saturday, the breakdowns went way beyond penalty. The Bruins didn't even take that many penalties. So it went way beyond that. And it was breakdowns coming at 5-on-5, not just, rush defense or odd man chances, but in zone stuff that we don't see from the Bruins very often, giving up seam passes, leaving guys open in front of the net. Obviously the Rangers are a great team. They now have passed the Bruins for the best record in the NHL, and they're very dangerous offensively, but a lot for the Bruins to clean up there. And, the schedule's been weird and tough, and that might be a factor, but the Rangers had the same exact schedule leading up to Saturday's game. They also had 5 and 8. They also played Friday afternoon. So that really doesn't get you too far with me in terms of an excuse.
So I'm going to follow Scott's negative take with a neutral take. I definitely, like I said earlier, I just think that if the Bruins are winning every game or losing, I still think that doesn't matter to me. The results in November, besides playoff positioning, it's not convincing me one way or the other that the Bruins are locked to win the Stanley Cup. Like, I think they're a playoff team. I think they're a solid playoff team. But even throughout their hot start this year, I haven't viewed them as like the cream of the crop contenders status that their record indicates. I still think that their team game needs work. And I would be saying this even if they were winning the last couple of games and not giving up 12, 13 goals, And for me, I'm not even saying go out there and get Nikita Zadorov or some big body defenseman that loves to play physical. I think I would take that. But what I want to see from this Bruins decor, they're great at checking with their feet. They're great at checking with their sticks. They're great at angling. They're really good defensive players. I still think that as a unit, the Bruins decor, and I think physicality goes team wide, but specifically with the decor, I just think that they're a little too easy to play against for other opponents, at least physically. And Hampus Lindholm comes to mind. He's not a physical player. Matt Grzelcyk is not a physical player. And that's not, it's okay. I'm just saying, I'm just pointing it out. Brandon Carlo, I think he has his moments, but I don't think players fear playing against him. Charlie McAvoy, yeah, you got to keep your head up, and players know that. Forbert, he's okay. He's not overly physical, but he's not a slouch. I just think this decor needs to adopt a unit-wide mentality of just being a little bit nastier to play against. However that comes, I just think they need a little bit more nastiness in their game. I just think they're too easy to play against as an opposing team in a forward group. You're not afraid to cycle on these Bruins, these defensemen. You're not afraid to forecheck. And like I said, I don't think going out and getting one player and adding it to the decor is the solution. I think everybody needs to buy in and just be a little bit more nasty to play against. And if not right now, when April comes around, because I do think that you look at every successful team that goes on a Stanley Cup run, you have to have a little bit of nastiness in your game, and that's my opening shift.
Yeah, and we've heard that be a point of emphasis from Jim Montgomery. He said before the season he wanted the Bruins to be more physical at both ends of the ice. Um, to me, where that shows up on defense is the battles in front of the net, which I think the Bruins had been doing a pretty good job of winning for the most part this season. And you've really seen it break down these last couple of games, though, where they're not. I know this isn't quite what you're talking about, Brian, but like the Bruins have left guys open in front. They've struggled to tie up sticks and bodies, and it's all physicality in the sense of winning battles and just getting yourself in a better position than the other guy. Pushing him out of the way so he doesn't have uh, space to get a deflection or to be there on a rebound. Um, I agree to an extent. Like some guys can probably be a little meaner, a little more physical. To me, like when it comes to playoffs, I think it's almost what your forecheck can do more that I think it can actually be like intimidating and help swing some momentum. Um, I do think like the Bruins forwards have work to do there. I think they can be more physical as well. And defensively, to me, it's more about like standing up, holding up against a forecheck. Like I don't necessarily need Carlo, Forbert, whoever throwing huge hits. Like I'd rather them just get to the puck first and move it. But I do need them to be able to take hits, and that's where we've seen the Bruins, have some issues in the past and make mistakes because they don't always handle that pressure well. So um, there's something there. Like I don't need it to be Bruins defensemen, running guys through the glass, but being able to win battles and hold up, under other teams' forechecks, I think is definitely, very fair.
Agreed.
And the one big check that I saw this weekend by a Bruins defenseman was McAvoy on Matt Poitras. That one was scary for a second. Completely accidental, both guys not seeing each other going for the puck, but I thought the Bruins were going to be down a center because it looked like he got him pretty clean in the head, and I was surprised to see Patrick come back about 5, 6, 7 minutes later. So that was crisis averted because I don't really know what they would have done if they lost Matt Poitras. They are very thin at center. So that was lucky that McAvoy's biggest hit of the weekend didn't knock out his own teammate. I think we should stick to the defense right here and bring in the fact that Lohrei was sent back down after his stretch of games here before Grzelcyk came back from injury. So Grzelcyk goes right back to that top pairing with McAvoy. That ends up with Mason Lohrei being sent back down to Providence, as well as Brown, right? So Grzelcyk back, Lohrei gone. I guess one last thought about how he did in his sample size of games up since he came in, and also whether or not maybe he's shouldn't be in Providence if he should still be in Boston.
Well, Scott and I discussed this at length on the last episode, and since then, obviously, Scott was ultimately proven right, or at least that the Bruins feel the way Scott did, and that they were going to send him down for X amount of time. And I don't like I stated, I wouldn't mind seeing him stick around, but I also understand why they're sending him down. I definitely think that he wasn't playing with the confidence of the most confidence that he has. He was kind of, you could tell his decision making was at times just a step behind because he was probably overthinking and not wanting to make mistakes. And then you see Matt Grzelcyk come back into the lineup, and he just has a little bit more oomph in his decision making. He's just a little bit quicker in his decision making, a little bit more of a professional at this point. So um, I thought Lowry played fine. You can also sit there and say that they gave up 7 goals against the Rangers, but let's be honest, that was happening with or without Lowry in the lineup. So, but yeah, I thought he was fine. I thought he had his moments. I think he's still a work in progress. I still think he has enough talent to learn at the NHL level right now. But I think that it'd be ignorant of me to not look at the situation that the Bruins are in as a team. They don't need him right now, and so I guess I was fine with it. I kind of expected it. Um, but if they keep getting up 7 goals, nobody's job on that back end is safe.
True. Yeah, I just think Lowry clearly has stuff to work on, and to me, development that goes beyond just, hey, just let him play through a couple mistakes. Like, just structurally decision making, especially in the defensive end. Like, there's a lot for him to work on, and that doesn't mean he's not close to NHL ready or anything like that. Like, we saw enough flashes to be encouraged during this stretch, and certainly offensively he can make things happen. He did get himself, involved in the ozone, involved in transition. Um, he's good with the puck on his stick when he's attacking, but defensively, like, you saw him lose some battles. You saw him get caught flat-footed at the offensive blue line. Just, as Brad said, like, a little slow in terms of decision making, in terms of deciding what the right thing to do is at NHL speed. So you can go down to Providence, and even though it's not the same speed, you get those reps in game situations of learning when to pinch, when to fall back, learning the right pass to make under pressure from the forward check, winning battles in front of the net and in the corner. Like, he can still do all that in Providence. He's also going to play on the power play and penalty kill, which he really wasn't doing in Boston. And just to kind of put like some final statistics on it, until Saturday, because Grizzlick is also now a -1 at 5-on-5. But through Friday, Lowry was the only Bruins defenseman who's been on the ice for more 5-on-5 goals against than for, and it was 11 against, 7-for. And in the 10 games that he played, he was on the ice for 11 of the 16 5-on-5 goals that the Bruins gave up. They just gave up more chances when he was on the ice, more goals when he was on the ice. And like, I feel like a lot of Bruins fans kind of came around on sending him down was the right thing to do, because even a week ago, it would be like, they can't send Lowry down. Like, you got to keep him, you got to play him. He's so promising. And by the end, like, I didn't really see a whole ton of backlash on Twitter of, fans like people have been saying, like, brace for Bruins Nation to freak out when he gets sent down. And I really didn't see a ton of that. Like, I think people by the end kind of understood, like, okay, he has work to do. Like, it's all right. Because even if you're not noticing like all the details, you notice when it's the same guy on the ice for goals against kind of over and over. Like, that's kind of hard to miss.
Yeah, and he kind of shot out of a cannon when he first entered the lineup. He played in 10 games, but in the first 3 games, he had a goal and an assist. So he started out really strong, and then you kind of started to see in the larger sample size, okay, this is where the polish needs to be. This is where, like, there's some rough edges that need to be fixed. But in his 10 games, he had 1 goal, 3 assists, and was a -3. And I think they had trouble finding the right fit for him as well. They had moved him around because he's probably not good enough to play on a top pairing. But that seemed like, but he was playing with McAvoy, and that seemed like the best place to put him. They also had him with Shattenkirk at times and Mitchell, and they rotated him around to different positions. I don't think they ever were particularly settled on where he would play best in the lineup. I will say that he was good enough that you can tell the Bruins actually have decent depth at defense. Wow, there's a lot of D words in a row. He's there in Providence if you need him. You also have Ian Mitchell, and then that's on top of what you would consider your healthy top 6 defensemen. So you have 8 that you can go to and that they're comfortable with. And then I guess if you consider Zaboral 9, they have some other defenders that, I mean, we saw Witherspoon as well. But
I was going to say, I don't know if Zaboral's even 9th.
Yeah.
I feel like he might be lower than that.
Yeah, because we saw Witherspoon before we saw him. But either way, I would say you have 8 guys that are NHL caliber everyday players, and 2 of them can't play every day. So you're at least in that situation where if we are talking and skipping ahead to playoffs, like everybody seems to want to in the conversations, when healthy, you have 8 guys. And, if not healthy, you have those 2 bonus guys you can throw in. And, hopefully by that time in the season, we're talking about months from now in the spring, maybe Mason Lohrei has polished off some things in Providence and is somebody that can come in and take ice time in the playoffs. So just a lot of time for him still to develop. And I don't think that it was a bad thing to send him down either. I think if he had kept playing like he did those first 3 games, then there would have been a riot. But because the next sample of games wasn't as good as the first 3, it made sense.
Yeah, and if we're gonna stick to the defense again, another player who I noticed seems to be on the ice a lot when goals are scored against the Bruins, Bridget and Scott, is Ian Mitchell. And he's inserted into the lineup at the expense of Kevin Shattenkirk. And I can't help but wonder, the last couple of games Shattenkirk is scratched and the Bruins give up, was it 12-13 goals, and Montgomery said he wants Shattenkirk to play faster, which fine. It's okay to demand anything of any of your players. But none of us here ever assumed or mistook Shattenkirk for a fast skater. Like, that's not what the Bruins got him to be, was this Cale Makar, Charlie McAvoy, stallion in the back end, rushing the puck. Like, they wanted him to be a solid veteran presence on the blue line that makes low risk, smart plays and can chip in offensively, and through his experience as a Stanley Cup winner, could just add some stability back there and a calming presence. Ian Mitchell is the exact opposite of all that. Like, I'm not trying to bash on the player, but he's a young kid. He's trying to make things happen, and he's trying, but he's all over the map. And I just feel like in that Detroit game and in the Rangers game, I just think those are the type of games where you kind of just want that calming veteran presence on the blue line. And I think, and I'm not saying that Shattenkirk in the lineup makes them beat Detroit that day or beat the Rangers that day, but let's just not forget why you brought in Shattenkirk, and let's maybe let him kind of keep carving out his role on that third D pair. And going forward, I would like to see him become more of a staple back there. That's all.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised by the scratch Saturday. That they'd been rotating a little bit, and to an extent, I understand that. But I thought maybe Shattenkirk's dealing with something very minor that they're just going to play it safe or something. But I asked Montgomery, because obviously Saturday was second straight game he got scratched, and he said no, he's healthy. And as you mentioned, he said he just wants him to play faster. And I thought that was odd, because it's like, one, you're playing a back-to-back. So to me, any rotation you can get for that second game is a plus. Like, Grizzly comes back and obviously replaces Lohrei. That's one spot that rotates and gets some fresh legs in. I thought you had a really easy chance to do that with Shattenkirk going in for Mitchell too. And to not do it is a little odd. There's also just and not that you have to do this, but Shattenkirk's from the New York City area. He grew up a Rangers fan. I do think guys tend to get up for those kinds of games. It's one of his former teams. That one actually felt like some sort of punishment and not just rotating, keep guys fresh, give Mitchell a chance. Like that legitimately felt like in Montgomery's eyes, Mitchell had passed Shattenkirk on the depth chart. And Brian, I'm with you. Like I don't really fully understand why. You can say Shattenkirk should, can play faster, hasn't been great or whatever, but I still think for the most part he's been more solid back there than Mitchell has been because, like I said, like Mitchell's a young kid, not a ton of NHL experience, and he's making some mistakes too. And even if like you want to bring advanced stats into it, like the Bruins are giving up more chances when Mitchell's on the ice than they have been with Shattenkirk, more high danger chances. And I actually think if Shattenkirk has been on a per 60-minute basis, has been on the ice for more goals against, but if like those chances and high dangers like level off, then Mitchell would be on the ice for more goals against. And I don't think there'd really be much of an argument that he's been better than Shattenkirk. And I'm kind of like a little surprised that Montgomery seems to be, I don't know, like I like ignoring or like overlooking some of Mitchell's shortcomings that I feel like we see. And Montgomery's more favoring him because yeah, he is probably a faster skater than Shattenkirk and he might be able to get more involved offensively at this point, but I'm not sure that that's making the Bruins a better team overall right now.
And he is a former player for Montgomery in college. So Montgomery has probably in his mind, he goes back to what was this player like in college, what was his strength in college, and really just maybe believes he can do certain things that maybe we haven't seen him do with the Bruins. So there's probably a bit of bias involved if I like it. That's just one thought that comes to my mind because I do think that Ian Mitchell has been a mixed bag because sometimes offensively he's getting shots through and he's being aggressive and stepping into the offense, but other times like he has been on the ice for some goals against and in front of his own net, he's not as strong a player as Shattenkirk. I do think that I worry a little bit for Shattenkirk in that he got scratched 2 nights in a row in a situation like you mentioned, Scott, that really it would have made a lot of sense not to. And I wonder if asking him to play faster at this point in his career is actually like what speed he can actually get up to. And obviously they sent down Mason Lohrei and they decided not to do anything drastic and make a decision where they're like, yeah, Lohrei over Shattenkirk, which they just didn't do. But if the depth chart is changing from Shattenkirk being your extra defenseman after he started out the season through 15 games being, your like a bottom pair defenseman but in the top 6 in everyday lineup,
even in the top 4 when McAvoy was suspended, like it was Shattenkirk who got moved up and got more minutes, not Mitchell,
and he got power play time, and I thought he looked solid on the power play, and that's a place that you could obviously now with McAvoy back and Grzelcyk back and Lindholm, you have guys that are probably better than him on the power play, but he's still an option there for you. And I don't know if he did enough based on what I've seen to get demoted at this point in the season. And maybe this is just a message being sent, but I'm not sure. It kind of seemed like an odd timing for it. And maybe we're missing something. Or maybe this is just trying to see what they have in Mitchell. Who knows? It sounds like a combination of a bunch of stuff, but I would disagree with a decision to make Ian Mitchell more of a regular player than Kevin Shattenkirk at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Shattenkirk's he's a proven winner in the league, and for years he was a top pair guy in this league, whether it was in Colorado or St. Louis or New York, and then obviously a more minor role in Tampa. But again, he won a cup. And I would argue
this is maybe matchup based. I don't know if there's something that Montgomery was thinking with New York that was like, okay, they're kind of like their offense is more speedy, or like, you know what I mean? Like there's an advantage to playing a guy that's 10 years younger and a little bit quicker. Maybe it was just a matchup based thing.
It's possible, but at the same
But
time, like,
even then though,
teams all year.
yeah, and even then, like if it was matchup based and kind of predetermined that way, I would have planned ahead and said, okay, which one's a better matchup for Mitchell? Which one's a better matchup for Shattenkirk? Like, I still think splitting those games would have made sense just because I think fresh legs help in the second game of a back to back. So, and just one last thing I would note here, like Derek Forbert has been better with Shattenkirk this season. Just to quickly run through a couple of advanced stats, like expected goals, Forbert Shattenkirk 47% Bruins. Forbert Mitchell 39%. Scoring chances 52% when Forbert's with Shattenkirk, 40% when he's with Mitchell. Like high danger chances, Bruins get more than they give up when Forbert and Shattenkirk are together. They give up more than they've gotten when he's with Mitchell. Like to me, everything kind of leans in Shattenkirk's favor, but
yeah, that's an important distinction to make too, because at the end of the day, we're also talking about a chemistry of a pair. Two guys that work better together can really improve the way that the structure is defensively, where coverage is, communication, knowing where each other is on the ice, different things like that. At the end of the day, it does matter which player fills in that pair better. And if Forbert's more comfortable playing with Shattenkirk, that's one thing. Though I know we've had people mention maybe Forbert should be the seventh defenseman, which as of right now, I don't think that's in the cards, especially seeing, a little bit of the hand that Montgomery is working with.
Yeah, I mean, Forbert's been solid this year. Like overall, I really don't have any issues with him, and obviously he's a big part of the penalty kill. Obviously, the Bruins' defensive issues this weekend though were bigger than just the sixth defenseman or third pair. So I'm curious to get you guys' take. Like, what is your level of concern after these two games? Like, do you think we saw like major issues that the Bruins are gonna have to fix, or do you sort of chalk it up as like a tough weekend and let's see how they bounce back?
Yeah, I think it's a tough weekend. I mean, we've mentioned it in their last 100 games, they've won like 78 of them or 79 or something like that. So it's inevitable. And something, if it wasn't inevitable, it's like, well, then again, it's kind of similar to last year where it's like you don't want them to have an easy go of it in the regular season, because turns out you kind of want people to be battle tested. Now you can sit there and say all you want, well, last year they didn't lose to Florida because they weren't battle tested in the regular season. It's because their goaltender got hurt, and it's because Bergeron was hurt, and Krejci was. You can sit there and list every reason you want. Ultimately, when the Bruins got smacked in the face in the playoffs, they had no response. So I want this team to go through adversity. I don't want them being the top seed. I know, Scott, you don't care about presidents. I just don't want the expectations. I don't. You know something? You mentioned that you don't believe in the President's Trophy curse, and that might be fair. But what I can tell you is that there were Bruins last year after the season ended, and you guys might recall who it was in particular. But you know what? It was Cam Neely actually, and he said, yeah, I do think the outside noise crept into the locker room. Maybe I don't know, because they're at a loss for words. And I think that in Boston, when you have the polarizing teams that you have, if they were to go into this postseason again, number one seed in the league, guarantee you're going to have a lot of people talking again. And I just don't think this Bruins team needs that. Like, go in there as a just one of 16, and go in there without these expectations of don't choke again, blah, blah, blah. Because, if you enter the playoffs as a 2 or 3 seed in your division or a wild card, no one's going to be saying don't choke, because the expectations are going to be on whoever's in that 1 seed. So for that reason alone, they're going to have to lose a couple of games if they want to finish not in first place. But also,
but also you set yourself up to play Toronto, or like, you know what I mean? Like you set yourself up to not play a wild card team that you theoretically should have a better chance against.
I think you need to I mean, that's fair, but look what happened last year. Like, there's no guarantees. Last year, you were a game away from playing Pittsburgh, and then you draw Florida because Pittsburgh lost to Chicago. So I don't want to watch. I don't care about like where the Bruins finish because every team is tough, and like I just think I care more about the Bruins psyche going into the playoffs than I do about who they're playing. And I just think that they had so much expectation on them last year. But regardless of who they played in the playoffs, I just think this team needs to go through some bumps. Go through some bumps, learn, and go from there. So if they let this compile into something like a 10-game losing streak or whatever, then shame on them. But this is good. This is good for them, I think.
And yeah, not for nothing, Detroit's a much better team than people expected them to be this year. And they're moved out of the wild card position, and now they're in the third position in the division. So they've outperformed, and the Rangers are probably the team that's most at this point in the season that's closest to the Bruins in terms of their dominance. So those are two really good teams. And then you look, I mean, we're talking about a bounce back, but when you look at who they're playing this week, the next two games are Columbus and San Jose. So those are teams that are completely different caliber than Detroit and New York.
Yeah, and you get these two games to bounce back and for the Bruins to fix the mistakes and get their game right, and then you get tested again Saturday night in Toronto with a pretty big game, and obviously in Toronto, Hockey Night in Canada, all that. So this should be an interesting week because I think if the Bruins, if like these mistakes carry over and all of a sudden they lose to Columbus or San Jose and like give up 4 goals to one of those teams, all right, like now we probably have some bigger concerns to discuss. But if they get right and then go up to Toronto and play well, then it looks a lot better. Adversity is not a bad thing, and I do think, even though like it looks pretty daunting on paper, like giving up 12 goals in 2 games, it's like we know they can fix a lot of these mistakes because we've seen them not make these mistakes in the past. Like we've seen their penalty kill be great for the vast majority of the season. Then it gives up 2 quick ones to Detroit's power play, another one shortly after power play ends. And it's like, okay, so does their penalty kill stink now? Or did they have a bad game that highlighted some things they have to fix? Like, I'm going to go with the latter. I still think their rush defense is something that they need to improve. And I know, Montgomery's kind of talked about that all year. But when I look at like some of the in zone mistakes against the Rangers and like especially the seam passes they gave up, where one in particular, I think it was the Panarin goal. Like Geeky I think he was playing center that shift, was too low in the slot, and so like the seam passes open above him, and it's like, all right, like that might be a player who just came back from injury, hasn't been playing a ton of center, ends up at center in a straight shift, and gets his positioning a little wrong. And like another one, I think it was in the Detroit game, I think it was Frederick was a little too high and kind of gave up a pass across. And it's like the Bruins are usually very good about having bodies and sticks in the right lanes in zone. Even when their rush defense has been off, their in zone defense has usually been pretty strong. So I think they can fix that stuff. For me, like the bigger sort of issue that I think they need to work on, and they've been starting to get better at it, but like they have not been a great possession team this year. And it looked like they had started to make some progress. I thought they were in the Florida game, which, by the way, like, I know like we're barely talking about because Friday and Saturday's games are fresher and more pressing. But like that was a really good win for them. And I think Florida right now looks like, the second best team in the division. So you can't just like totally wipe that away either. But I do think they need to be hold on to pucks more in the offensive zone, get more cycles going, because that also helps your defense and it helps your rush defense. Like teams aren't going to be as effective attacking you off the rush if they just spent 30 seconds defending in their own zone as you cycle around. They're going to be tired and they're just going to be trying to dump it in. So that is something like I think they still have to get better at. And Montgomery has talked about, quite a bit that they have to get better at.
I think there's another thing that we can pinpoint as something that can change, and that would be the play of Brad Marchand, who's gone. Now he's kind of in his own little slump. He's gone 6 games without a goal. I think he only has 1 assist in that time, maybe 2, but his passing has not been crisp. And I know, Brian, this is something you wanted to talk about because Brad Marchand historically doesn't really slump. And he doesn't, his passing usually is better and his puck protection, and we know what he can be. For whatever reason, over the past, I want to say 2 weeks, it's been kind of noticeable, some of the turnovers, because he had that turnover too that led to the empty net goal. And that was Friday. And that was just kind of okay, what are we doing here? And not that, the game was probably already out of reach, but he turned that over. He had a few that it was just it ended up putting the rush defense to the test, because when you turn it over kind of high in the zone, you leave the opposition able to transition quickly. And so, Brian, I know you wanted to talk about this, but this is another thing that is something that could improve on, and also something that we don't think will happen the whole season.
Yeah, well, I hope not. Marchand is an interesting situation for me. He's clearly still one of their best players, but I am weary of a potential regression for him production-wise, and at a time where they kind of need him to not regress. Last year was the first time since 2015-16 where he wasn't well over point per game pace in the regular season. Now, last year he did start off the season on the shelf with off-season surgery and coming back from that. But when he did, he finished with 67 points in 73 games. Nothing to sneeze at. Okay. Clearly 6 points off point per game pace. But then in the playoffs, he obviously went a little quiet too. But you have to keep in mind who you're talking about, right? So less than a point per game in the regular season is something that he hadn't done in the prior 6 years. So for him, that does mean something, right? It was a bit of a regression for him. Right now, he's 19 points in 20 games, so around a point a game. Am I worried about him scoring? No. But Bridget, to your point, when you're not scoring, what are you doing? And he's just, his last 5 games, I think he has 3 assists, or 5 or 6 games. And yeah, he's gone pointless in his last 3 games. And in that process, he's doing nothing to spark the team in a positive way. He takes a dumb cross-checking penalty against Detroit when it was the last thing that they needed in that point in the game. He's just turning the puck over constantly and carelessly. He's forcing plays, and he just, I don't know. I'm a little worried that maybe he's just not the player that they need him to be right now. And is 19 points in 20 games bad? No, don't mistake what I'm saying. But you have to keep your expectations relative to who the player is and what they've done in this league. And if he's not scoring for a couple games here and there, I get it. Best league in the world, it's going to happen. But as the captain, you can't be would Patrice Bergeron take a stupid cross-checking penalty like that? An emotional penalty against Detroit because, he turned the puck over 30 seconds before and he's taking it out on the defenseman, Goss's fair, whatever. Was Bergeron having careless turnovers in the offensive zone and leading to transition the other way? No. So he's got to be a little bit better for them. I know he's got 19 points in 20 games, but he's got to be better.
And if you just a quick stat, if you split it in half, the first, because he's played an even 20 games, first 10 games versus next 10 games, he had 5 of his 7 goals in the first 10, 2 in the second 10. And even more than that, he's gone. I would say really his best production was first 7 or 8 games of the season, and then the next 12 have been more of a struggle.
Well, I mean, he had been kind of hot really before these last 3. Like he had a 6-game point streak and 9 points in those 6 games. And I thought that top line of him, Zacha, and Pasternak was really starting to play like a top line, with an ability to kind of take over the majority of their shifts on the ice. And then these last 3 games have definitely been very quiet. And yeah, you mentioned the frustration cross-checking penalty. It's interesting because like Marchand being over a point per game player and like being an elite forward versus just being a good forward who's around a point per game, which is obviously still very good. It's such a big difference for this team because if Marchand's like at something less than elite, then you just have one elite forward. You have David Pasternak. And that still gets you somewhere. But if you have Marchand get back to like truly elite status and not just, where he's been for now the last season plus, that makes such a huge difference because then either you split up your 2 elite forwards and they can each really drive an effective top 2 line, or you load them up and you should have one of the best lines in the NHL. If Marchand's just good or very good, but not quite elite, then you're loading up your top line and it's just a good top line, but not one of the best in the league. Or you split them up and you put them with Poitras and DeBrusk, like say, because I've seen that kind of floated out there as like, hey, could that be the spark that, kind of gets Poitras and DeBrusk going on the score sheet, where I still think that line has played pretty well for the most part. And DeBrusk did have back-to-back games with a goal. But it's like, could you put Marchand there and really spark that even further? And it's like, if Marchand's playing his best, yes, that's what would happen. If Marchand's playing like he has the last 3 games, then that doesn't really guarantee you that he's even going to spark that line.
Yeah, and also, is Heinen playing up? Like, who's moving up? Are you splitting up the Coyle line? Yeah.
But Scott, that's a good point to highlight because I don't want people to listen to this and be like, oh, guy's not scoring 100 points. Brian's being a D-bag towards Marchand. That's not it at all. But to your point, and you kind of illustrated it better than I did. This team offensively, they're not the deepest and highest of talented forward groups of the top teams in the league. You have David Pasternak, like you mentioned, and then you have a bunch of like good NHLers, with Brad Marchand being the other exception. And that's why what you said is exactly what I was trying to say. They need him to be elite, like you mentioned, as opposed to just good, because that makes the big difference for this team. And that's why and again, if you're not going to be scoring at an elite level, you absolutely cannot be, just constantly trying to force passes through people's skates and just, look like you're, playing roller hockey out there. Especially not when you're the captain of the Boston Bruins. You hold a different weight of responsibility on your shoulders. So
I guess the last part of that question is, are you worried about it? Like, is this something that's like in your mind going to be resolved in the next few games, or is this something that is like a longer term question, like a longer term issue maybe?
I'm not so worried about him. Well, I shouldn't say that. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried. Like if he ends up scoring like 60 points in 82 games, yeah, that's not what you need. You need more out of him. But what I'm more so worried about is when shit hits the fan for this team, can he be the leader they need him to be? Or is he going to revert back into like the Marchand that has a short temperament and doesn't and acts before he thinks? And this team can't afford that. Like so I'm a little bit worried. I'm worried about, or worried might be too strong. I'm curious to see if he can step up as a leader, as the leader, I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think like off the ice, in terms of what he's saying in the room and how he practices and all that, like I think he's a great leader, and I think he has been. And I think even talking to him like after the Rangers game, and I thought he struck the right sort of tone, which is like, yeah, we clearly weren't good enough. There's stuff to work on. We have to come, to practice or morning skate Monday, I guess, ready to work hard. But it's not time to panic. Like that was the right tone, in my opinion. But then it also has to carry over onto the ice. And that's where like he has to kind of try to guard against his instincts. You mentioned like that hot-headedness. And is it the end of the world that he took, a cross-checking penalty that for all intents and purposes kind of ended any chance of a comeback in that game? In November? No, not really. Was it the end of the world when he got, it's probably a couple of weeks ago now, but a penalty for arguing with the refs during play, like after he didn't get a call? No, but you don't really want to have like any of those. Like I just think, the captain, it's tough, right? And we talked about this going in. Like Marchand has to find that balance of his leadership's going to be different than Bergeron and Chara's, and to an extent, that might be great. Like him being a little more fiery and a little more like hard on his sleeve might be a good thing. Like that might actually be like a nice change that could help this team. But then he also has to find that balance of not letting it go too far, with costly penalties or, obviously he hasn't crossed this line yet, but like if it went into another suspension or something like that, that just like can't happen when you have a C.
Brian, did you have anything to say to that, or?
Nope.
To bring it back around to my opening take, are you guys surprised that Charlie Coyle has more goals than Brad Marchand at this point in the season and is tied with him for points? Because as of right now, Charlie Coyle has 9 goals. That's second most behind Pasta, and that's 2 more than Marchand.
Major stick taps to Coyle. Major stick taps because, now, again, it's all relative to the player. Brad Marchand, 19 points in 20 games, a couple bad plays, a couple stupid penalties. Brian's sitting here. He's got to be better. Charlie Coyle, 19 points in 20 games, and I'm asking for stick taps on the boards for him. But again, it's relative to the player, and he's stepping up without a doubt about it. Clearly on pace for career highs. And the best way to describe it is Charlie Coyle was given an opportunity in the lineup that he previously didn't really have. Although, again, we've mentioned in 2021 when Krejci went to the Czech Republic, they did give him that second line center opportunity, and he didn't run with it. Second time around, he's given an opportunity, and he's taken advantage of it. And more minutes, more opportunity, and leads to production. Not for everybody, but for him. And he has stepped up. I've loved his game outside of the scoring as well. And so he has definitely made his case known to be a top 2 center on this team, where a month ago we were kind of pounding the Matt Patra chest, and Matty P has kind of gone quiet. Back, it's one of those reminders. It's a long season as a 19-year-old, and he's gonna have his ups and downs. But Coyle has been steady Eddie this entire season, and more so. So, point per game pace from Charlie Coyle is definitely more than I expected, and good for him.
Yeah, and he's earned it. Like we thought he was basically going to just be given second line center job, and then he had to beat out Patra for it. And there were even a couple games early on there where it was like, oh, it looks like Patra's, probably the second line center the way this is lined up, and maybe Coyle's already back to being the third line center. And Coyle's just kept playing really well, and now is clearly one of their top 2 centers. And this isn't a knock on Zach at all, because I think Zach is also having a strong season. But at times, like Coyle's, been playing like the best center. So definitely have to give credit to him. And it's not just a matter of, you put him between 2 really good players, so of course his points are up. Like No, his most common line has been James Van Riemsdyk and Trent Frederick. That's
Yes,
we would have thought
what we would have called the third line, but it's not the third line anymore.
Exactly. Like they've been playing like a true second line, and Coyle is the biggest reason for that. Is his play. Now, just to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer, I would note that Charlie Coyle is shooting 23%, which is double his career average. So he probably won't continue to score goals at this rate, but he's playing really good all-around hockey, even besides that.
And he's not on the top power play unit. Like he's scoring with the chances he gets. It's not like he's set up to be one of the guys who's on the ice for the best opportunities. Like he's a penalty killer more than he is a power play guy. He has 2 power play goals this season, and sometimes you see him out there with the first unit, but usually it's Van Riemsdyk that's the net front guy in the first unit. Sometimes they'll throw Coyle out there to take the opening face off of a power play and kind of mix in for a little bit and then come out. But like he's not set up for that. Like that's not his role. He's not the guy that they're like, okay, yeah, you can go pick up the scraps in front of the net on the power play, like with Van Riemsdyk and sometimes DeBrusk. But he has done everything he could with this. And also, like you mentioned, this would be what we would have called the third line. Like we would have called, well, besides Heinen, I'm not sure who we really would have thought was on the side of the second line, but like a line with Poitras and DeBrusk, naturally we were kind of calling the second line for a while. But production-wise, it's been the third line, and Frederick, Van Riemsdyk, and Coyle has been the better of the 2 of those lines. So, he's driven that. He's driven a lot of that, and not just as the leading goal scorer on that line, but also as the best defensive player on that line, and somebody who has the leadership role on that line. And I also think that I want to give some credit to Trent Frederick in that his development over the past few seasons makes him able to compete at this level that he could be a second line player. Whereas in the past, like it took him a little bit to get up to this kind of speed in terms of, his skill. And I honestly think a lot of it was understanding his role and finding chemistry. So, and Van Riemsdyk has been, we've mentioned this before, the biggest pleasant surprise of an addition for the Bruins in the offseason. So it's all come together for that line over the last few games. Even when they were losing, even when they were giving up a lot of goals, that line still looked good.
Yeah, and you mentioned Trent Frederick, and it wasn't too long ago. It was not this past preseason, but the one before. Okay, so heading into the 2022 season, Trent Frederick, to that point, hadn't done anything at the NHL level, really, except for try to fight Ovechkin and a couple scraps with Wilson, which, showed spunk, but didn't really produce at all. And then he had a preseason heading into last year where you kind of think he's fighting for a job, and he sucked. He was one of the worst players in preseason as far as a player who had something to prove. And then the regular season started, and he just had did he eclipse 20 goals last year? Did he get 20 goals last year?
17, I believe he ended up at. But I would also, like, to your point, he was a healthy scratch opening night last year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like he hadn't given anybody any hope, any promise that he was going to be able to turn this thing around. And last year, Scott, as he just said, 17 goals and had some really strong games along the way, and some really good fights. He was a very good player with Hall and Coyle, and he was great. And then
the entire team was heavily in the plus in terms of plus minus, but he was a plus 24. Like most of the team was like plus 20 or better, but he was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure even Todd Angeli was a plus player last year for them. So like, there's always something. But anyway, going into this,
he got a minus for that one Canadian anthem slip. Although it was really more the organist, but
yeah, that was Ron Pulser that also took the minus there. But the question this year was, okay, everybody and their mother had an amazing career year last year. Can he follow it up this year? Last year wasn't a fluke. He has arrived on the scene as an everyday effective NHLer. Has he reached his offensive ceiling yet? Probably not, but to your point, Bridget, kudos to him as well. And yeah. Now, Scott, I don't know if you had a follow up on Frederick. I did want to give Danton Heinen some props too, but I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it creates kind of an interesting situation because I still feel like if we're talking longer term, rest of the season, building your team towards the playoffs and hopefully making a deep run, like as good as Trent Frederick has been, and in my mind, I look at that, I'm still like, okay, he should probably still be a third liner though, and you would think like that'd be like a natural place to upgrade the roster come trade deadline time is, find another true top six winger. But then it's like, well, be careful what you wish for because as we know and as we've seen, like Coyle and Frederick just click really well together. And even at times where if Frederick isn't scoring a ton, like he has 8 points in 20 games. So it's not like he's keeping pace with Coyle at 19, but it's like their games work together and you could go out and get a more talented player with a better track record. But like, what if you plug him in there and he doesn't click with Coyle the same way? Like, so yeah, I do still think like even if it ends up being a third liner instead of a true second liner, I think they probably are going to need another scoring threat at some point. But that might tie into where we're going next because Heinen's one of the guys who's played up in the lineup, and now Morgan Geeky's back as well. So some options for the Bruins to look at.
So I actually have another name I want to bring up in a little bit, but let's stick with the players on the current roster. Yeah, I think Danton Heinen has been, he's been great. I mean, great might be strong, but he's been really good for him. What's he got? 5 points in 12 games. How many games did he play for them so far? 12 games, 5 points. He's just been steady. Like, doesn't make mistakes. Reliable. We've seen him in Boston before for a couple of years. We know what he's capable of then. He's more or less the same player now, just a little bit more probably confidence or just veteran savvy. But as it pertains to him, like he's been with Patra and DeBrusk, and obviously that line hasn't been going off on fire, but DeBrusk scores on a good forecheck on that line in Florida, and Heinen finishes off a play against Detroit. I'm trying to remember who got that to him up front. Was it Frederick maybe on a line change?
I thought it was Coyle. Let me check.
Maybe.
It was a weird bounce off the wall too.
It was Lohrei.
It was Lohrei. It went off the wall, and then I think it hit Coyle and came back out to Heinen. Or something.
Yeah, I think Coyle might have Coyle got an assist. So I think it was like a quick touch.
Yeah,
I don't even know if it was fully intentional, but
yeah. I don't know if it was either, and neither did Heinen. Heinen was looking around after he scored, like he was confused what happened, but he was like, "I scored, but like how?"
So we'll catch a few butterflies with the same net here. Danton Heinen, thoughts on him, and of course, Jake DeBrusk does break out of his goal scoring slump in Florida. Just your guys' thoughts on those two players.
Yeah, I think Heinen's been basically as advertised, like a little bit of Swiss Army knife. He's moved around. He ended up with Coyle and Frederick, the game that Van Riemsdyk sat. I think he's been a pretty good fit with Patra and DeBrusk. It's so interesting because like I do feel like that line pretty consistently just has like good shifts. And you do see DeBrusk get 2 goals in 2 games, Wednesday and Friday, although one of them is, on the top power play unit, so it's not with that line. But still feels like at some point they're going to have to score a little more than they have, obviously. DeBrusk and Patra, when they've been together, like scoring chances, shots, expected goals, all of that are like 60% in the Bruins' favor. Like it's impressive, and yet it's just not translating to a ton of actual goals. And that's been whether they've had Heinen with them or Geeky before that. And now Geeky comes back and had, I think, a rusty first game on Friday, better second game Saturday, and scores a goal on an absolute rocket of a shot. So they're gonna have some playing around to do in this bottom six and figure out, who best fits where, whether it's keeping Heinen with Patra and DeBrusque and letting them continue to build, whether Geeky gets a chance there again because he had some chemistry with Patra earlier this year. The other one's probably on the fourth line, which for now bumps Oscar Steen out, although Steen could cycle in for Lauko at some point. So some moving pieces here that I think Montgomery can play with and try to find, exactly what fits best, because I think we've seen flashes from kind of all of these combos, but maybe not anything that's really settled in quite as well as the top six has, and certainly as that Coyle line has.
And I think that's been the most frustrating line is the Patra DeBrusque kind of line, just because you see it and you're like, okay, like in all the notes I'm taking about this line, it's like, oh, this good cycle, like this good strong, like move with the puck, or like most of what your eyes are telling you is this line is possessing and having good offensive zone shifts, and it's just not turning into production, I guess. I think maybe just a little bit of a strategy change on that line could help. It's hard to say because, I mean, we know DeBrusque could be good net front. Seems like they've all kind of cycled into that. When they're together, they all kind of take turns out in front of the net. But yeah, that's been the line. That's like, if they could just start matching what those stats that you're talking about, Scott, like coming to at least like more of an equilibrium with that stat, then you're adding a lot of production. And it was, I mean, for DeBrusque, that power play goal comes net front because Van Riemsdyk was out. So like you plug him in there, he does well, but it's probably not going to be his role as much because Van Riemsdyk is usually the guy there. So that's one goal, and you can, you can be happy for him, but it also is not like, okay, this is an everyday solution for his scoring problems, because you're taking Van Riemsdyk off of that line, or you're taking one or the other off that top power play unit.
Let me ask you guys a question. We all here agree that the Bruins need another difference maker up front. And we all think that, well, I guess we could wait and see the trade deadline and see what happens. But a top two center, I just don't think they're out there necessarily, unless there's some sort of hockey trade to be had, or a team like Calgary really just wants to, sell the farm or whatever. I don't know if you guys heard the name I said, but Patrick Kane has been linked to a lot of contenders in the East, Toronto, Florida, Carolina, out west, maybe Dallas. And my question to you guys is, the Bruins need another top six forward. And if Patrick Kane took a pay cut, which it sounds like he might do to go anywhere because he's made his money in his career and he wants to go to a contender. Well, the Bruins they're a contender, and if he'd be willing to take a pay cut to go somewhere else, why not Boston? Obviously, he's not a center, but there's question marks there. But how come you guys haven't heard the Bruins name at all? Interested in him? Should they be interested in him? What are you guys' thoughts on Patrick Kane?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, for starters, one reason you don't hear it is because the Bruins have no cap space. So they would have to make a trade to, like, even at a discount to be able to fit him in. So that's part of it. Other than that, it is a little odd that, like, he's seemingly been linked to every other team. And maybe that's just, I don't know, maybe the Bruins just aren't really interested, and that's why we haven't heard it. I do think
My thought is that maybe they assessed his injury situation and his, like, the point in his career as not worth the risk.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to get to, is like Kane, obviously it's still fairly talented and can put up some points. He was never great defensively. He's gotten even worse, and there have been times where, like, he's almost been more of a negative than a positive. And I think part of where he can really be a positive for a team is still in the power play. well, where does he play on the Bruins top power play unit? Like he's not obviously Pasternak's staying on his left elbow. Kane usually plays on the elbow on the right side. So is he replacing Brad Marchand?
Yes.
Are you moving Marchand net front? Like how exactly are you doing that? Because Marchand hasn't been very good net front on the power play when he's had to play there before. So that's sort of another factor. Is like I think there's teams where Kane would have a very obvious and natural fit on their power play. And then with the Bruins, it's like, I don't know, kind of duplicates a really good player you already have there.
I think there's a lot of areas on the ice where Brad Marchand at this point in his career and Kane's career is like better than Kane, probably like compete level for one, maybe, or just a little bit of he's a little bit more tenacious. But I don't think power play is one of them. I think Patrick Kane's an instant upgrade on that right elbow over Marchand. Love Marchand, but like especially if you give him a little bit of practice and let him get his feet wet. I mean, his playmaking, Scott, it's it's better than Marchand's.
So my thought is it like worth the risk that you have to trade away? Like, what piece are you getting rid of to make room for this contract? Would you rather have the stability of or the depth of maybe someone that you're giving up, who maybe is a better defensive player, more not as much of a liability for injury or for just speed or whatever? It's not just a guy you can add. Like, it's not just like, oh, we're going to sign him because of the cap situation. So it is in your mind like, okay, what are we giving up and what are we getting? And maybe because of that, it just doesn't make as much sense for Boston.
Scott, is there a caveat to that with Patrick Kane being over 35 and like being able to do like something like they did with Krejci and Bergeron with the bonus type stuff?
Yeah, I think you could. Obviously, as it did with Bergeron and Krejci, that means you're going to have overages for next season that will work against you. But even still, like, I mean, the Bruins have like $50,000 in cap space right now, so you got to free up some money no matter what. Like, it's probably in terms of who you're
by
trading.
The way, you can't sign a $50,000 contract. It's a little bit below league minimum.
And even though Scott says before that the cap accrues over the season, I don't think that's in play here because Kane's going to want to sign a contract far before the deadline.
Correct. And by the way, the Bruins aren't accruing any cap space because Milan Lucic is still on long-term injured reserve. So they're not even doing that. Yeah, I think you would probably be like who you're trading is probably names that we've floated in rumors before. And it's like, if it's someone up front, you look at Jake DeBrusk. If it's on defense, you look at maybe it's Forbert or Grzelcyk, and then you call Lohrei up full time, which we just talked about. Is he really ready for that? So those are like, you're looking at one of those moves in my mind in order to fit Kane in.
And I don't really like any of those, honestly, for different reasons for each player. But and also just the fact that like he hasn't caught on anywhere yet. Like he could have signed as a free agent before the season started, but he's still where he is right now, still kind of shopping and gonna probably have a lower price than he originally thought he would. And I just don't really trust that he's fully healthy and like the Patrick Kane that everybody's thinking of. That might not be there. I don't know how much of it's still there.
Well, I guarantee you, though. Well, I do think that with a full off season and addressing his injury, I do think he was playing hurt last year, and I think that whoever gets his services this year will be getting more than what the Rangers did. I think last year when they brought him in at the deadline, it was kind of there was too many toys in the store last year with that Rangers team. I mean, Boston had a similar issue, but so did the Rangers. The Rangers got bounced in the first round, and they had a roster that should have gone much further too. So, I mean, if Patrick Kane goes to like the Hurricanes, I mean, the East is in trouble because the Hurricanes are a fantastic team and they just lack a little bit of scoring punch. I have a feeling he might end up in Dallas. So look, I'm not saying I would do it. I don't think you guys would do it anyway if the Bruins could do it. I don't know if you guys love the player at this point. But I do think the Bruins need help up front. Maybe it comes internal. Maybe Fabian Lysell gets a look at some point and he jumps onto the scene. Maybe Fabian Lysell doesn't play a game for the Bruins this year. Who knows? I'm just trying to think of different ways that this team could get a little bit of offensive punch at some point.
I would also just say though, like, yes, Kane was clearly playing hurt last year, but these serious hip surgeries, like they do not guarantee that you come back as your old self. I mean, we just talked about, Marchand last year never really. Now he still had a good season, but was never really fully back to himself. Nicholas Backstrom down in Washington has not even been close to the same since he had hip surgery. We know, different situation because he was a goalie, but Tuke ended up retiring and they're all slightly different surgeries. Like it's not like all four of those are the same. But I'm just saying, like, it is kind of one area of the body where, we kind of think nowadays, like, every surgery you can make a full recovery from and be good afterwards. And in hockey with hips, like, that's the one thing that still seems to take guys a while. And, there's really no guarantee, especially in your 30s, that you're going to come back the same. So I do think whatever team signs him, like, there is some risk involved because he might say he feels good and he's ready to go. And then you get on the ice and, like, 20 games in, you're like, oh boy, like Patrick Kane really doesn't look like Patrick Kane at all. So
also, not for nothing, he hasn't been. But he missed the first, say, 20 games of the season, and he's not at NHL speed right now. Like, I'm sure has been, working on the ice or whatever, but that's not games. Like, I'm sure he's been rehabbing and skating and doing all of that stuff. But you know how it looks when you have to get up to speed to an NHL level when everybody else is already kind of hitting that stride and you're coming in and you haven't played in a while and you already were a little bit slow last season. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the Bruins are in a situation where they're competing this year. Maybe to many people's surprise, maybe not. Maybe to the Bruins' own surprise, maybe not. But I do think because they're a team that's atop the league, yet again, you have to take them seriously. They have to take themselves seriously as a team that okay, well, we're contending again this year. And so I think while you don't want to tinker with chemistry too much, like maybe last year they did, and maybe just kind of ride what you have and see how you do in the playoffs. I do think maybe adding one scoring punch could help this team. If it's not Patrick Kane, which it probably isn't, if it's not Fabian Lysell, which it probably isn't, and we don't think Morgan Geekie is going to be a 30-goal scorer anymore, or Danton Heinen, like maybe they'll just stand pat, and then at the deadline, they'll try to just add a, affordable middle six, borderline top six forward if they can find one. And I'm sure every team, there's always sellers. I'm sure they'll be able to find something. And I'm sure that's what their plan is. They're probably just going to ride it till the deadline and see what they can find at the last hour.
Yeah, and I'm totally okay with that plan for the record. Like, you're in good shape despite these last two games. I'm totally fine with riding it out, seeing what you have in this team again. Like, see if Potter and DeBrusque can get going. See what Frederick is. Does that line hold up like a true second line, or does it need to be upgraded? Like, by getting off to such a great start, you've given yourself a lot of slack to be able to work through things and not have to jump at like the first possible move to make because, you're fighting for your playoff lives already. Like, you've given yourself some cushion to wait things out and be patient. And I think that's a luxury that the Bruins should take advantage of and then reassess closer to the deadline.
All right, guys. So the Bruins are off. Well, actually, they're playing tonight. They're playing the Blue Jackets tonight. So,
Yes.
well, but again, like we mentioned offline, like there was so much to cover. Any other lingering storylines from the weekend worth discussing, or just kind of put it
I
off?
think we should say whatever we even talked about. I think we should save for next episode since we're already an hour and 20 minutes into this. So
Yeah, well, I thought we were gonna do a 3-hour episode today.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. I have other things. I have my 3 other jobs to do.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Scott, you're all set?
All good. Yep. I'll spare everyone New York City stories. So.
Oh, Scotty.
Nah, there's nothing super crazy anyway.
What?
So
Where did you see rats? Where were the rats?
Actually, didn't see. Oh, well, did see rats in the subway, of course.
Yeah.
saw a bunch of mouses though walking the High Line.
They're called mice.
That's true.
Believe it or not, Scott edits our grammar when I used to work for the website.
Yeah, just as long as he never brings up any of my horrible mistakes, I'm gonna
me
fail English. That's impossible.
How many me's did you see, Scott? Like, I don't know.
So you didn't throw on a Spider-Man costume and run around Times Square when you were there?
Didn't even go to Times Square, thank God.
Good.
Stayed away.
Yeah, you gotta go to Sbarro's and get some authentic New York style pizza, right? All right. Well, yeah, we'll save any other stories until Wednesday. So in the meantime, thank you all for listening. Have a great rest of your Monday, Tuesday, and we'll talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.